Hey guys, today we are going to be doing the Texas Revolution. It is 408, so let's get started. So to understand the Texas Revolution, which is basically Texas's desire or fight to become independent from Mexico, you need to know a little bit about the background of Mexico first. So in 1821, Mexico became independent from Spain. And just like when the US became independent from Great Britain, our economy was pretty rough. It was pretty stop and go. And so same thing for Mexico. They wanted to try to, strengthen their own economy now that they were independent. So one thing that Mexico did to try to strengthen their economy is they encouraged Americans to move into this area right here, what we would call Texas, to basically stimulate the economy, bring agriculture with them, bring their connections to the American markets with them, and to hopefully eventually help the Mexican economy grow. But the Americans that were invited to come live over here in Texas had to follow a few requirements. The first requirement, if you were going to be American living in Mexico owned Texas, was that you had to learn how to speak Spanish. Another requirement is that you had to convert to Catholicism. Catholicism was very predominant in Mexico, but in the US, Protestantism was more popular. Catholicism wasn't. They're both types of Christianity, just practiced differently. And then lastly, Americans had to promise to obey Mexican laws. And one of the Mexican laws was no slavery. So even though Americans were being asked to come over and live in Mexico to bring agriculture, they were not allowed to bring slaves with them. All right, so you have these rules written on paper. Americans agree to them. They sign a document. They move over into Mexico. But you're probably not surprised here, Americans did not follow these rules. They didn't learn Spanish. They did not convert to Catholicism, and they definitely brought slaves with them. So by the 1830s, Mexico was pretty frustrated with the lack of disregard that the Americans had for Mexican laws, and they stopped US immigration into this part of Mexico, into Texas. The Americans living there were pretty frustrated because now they couldn't go back and forth freely, and so they rebelled to make Texas independent. So we call this fight the Texas Revolution. It's going to last a few months, basically within the span of 1 year, 1836, where Americans living in Texas fight for independence from Mexico. Now, the Americans living in Texas at first don't have the help of the US Army. It's just a militia. Remember, a militia is just a group of people with guns acting like an army. So, fighting for Texas independence is Sam Houston, an American, who was leading the Texas militia. And that's how Houston, Texas gets its name. And fighting to keep Texas as part of Mexico is the dictator, the military dictator of Mexico, Santa Anna. So these are the two main groups that are fighting against each other in the Texas Revolution. Now, there are several different battles you can see here. There's a few of them. The biggest and most famous one is the Battle of the Alamo. So here's a picture actually of the Alamo. It's a building. The Alamo was a Spanish Catholic mission. It's kind of like Catholic missionaries. It's like a makeshift church for them, but it was abandoned. So it's just this empty building that is today in San Antonio, Texas. And the Texans who are fighting for independence, they capture the building, they get inside, and they stay there for a few months while they wait for supplies from America, actually from Jackson and the American Army, which we'll talk about in a minute. So you have these Texans, there's about 200-ish of them inside the Alamo, and they become surrounded by Santa Anna's troops. And for several weeks, Santa Anna's troops bomb the Alamo on all sides. But the Texans, they try to hold the Alamo, they try to keep it and just wait for reinforcements to appear. However, after a few weeks, it becomes clear that the Texans are losing energy, they're losing resources, and eventually they are attacked from all sides by Santa Anna's troops. The Texans inside put up a pretty big fight, but in the end, all about 200-ish of them were killed. But while they were fighting, they did kill 600 Mexican soldiers in the battle, and so Americans at the time kind of used this battle as a way to gather support for Texas independence, saying, yeah, everyone inside died, but they were able to take out a lot of the enemy during the fight. And so this famous battle cry called Remember the Alamo becomes a real source of nationalism and unity in America and helps to rally some of the support of Americans for the Texas fight for independence. Another important battle that happened during this time is called the Goliad Massacre. I don't really know if you can call it a battle. It is more of a massacre here. But also, it's going to be down here. The Alamo is right there. But several weeks after the Battle of the Alamo, Santa Anna's troops executed 350 Texans at Goliad, and that was just another example or a source of nationalism for Americans, feeling like they have to rally behind Texas to become independent as they fight against Mexico. So how is Jackson responding? Well, he sends U.S. troops to go help Texas fight Mexico and become independent. And like we said earlier, this whole Texas Revolution, including the Alamo, really increases nationalism in America. If you think about kind of what's going on in this time period of the 1830s, you have Jackson and the nullification crisis and the bank war and the panic coming up and all these different things that are kind of creating America to become divided against each other. They're all sources of sectionalism. But here we have a point, the Texas Revolution, where all Americans can kind of rally around and feel unified against a common enemy, which was Mexico. With the help of the U.S. troops, eventually the Texas militia defeats the Santa Anna's troops at the Battle of San Jacinto, I believe is what it is. And Santa Anna is forced to sign the Treaty of Velasco, which basically recognizes Texas as independent, and Santa Anna surrenders. There's a little bit of confusion, though, as to what Texas actually is, though. So Americans, or the people living in Texas who are American, believe that the Texas Republic, or the Republic of Texas, is going to be this entire green area, the light and the dark green. However, Mexico believes that Texas is really just this area, that this whole light green part still belongs to Mexico. So there's this border dispute, which eventually is going to cause a war a little bit later on as to what Texas actually is. But in the minds of Americans, the Republic of Texas, this independent country, it is not a state yet. This independent country of Texas has a president whose name is Sam Houston and a flag right here with the Lone Star on it, which is often why Texas is called the Lone Star State. Okay, but remember, at this point, Texas is an independent country. It is not part of Mexico. It is not part of the U.S. But Texas wants to become a part of the U.S. So whenever you're adding a new state to the country, Congress has to approve it. And so Jackson opened up the debate on whether or not to annex Texas. Annexation just means adding it as a state. And there were some pretty heated debates over whether or not Texas should be added. One debate was over slavery. If Texas is added, it would be a slave state because it's below the Missouri Compromise line. And it's a really big state, and it would definitely throw off the balance in Congress. There were also people who believed that adding Texas, like this whole green area, adding this all to the United States, when some of it Mexico still believes they own, is going to cause Mexico to want to go to war. So because of these debates, especially the debate over slavery, Congress just denied Texas annexation at the time in the 1830s and said, you know what, for 8 years, we have so much stuff going on right now. We have tariff issues, we have economic crisis issues, we have so many problems. We just need to stop talking about slavery for 8 years. So they put a gag order on slavery from 1836 until 1844. If you're not debating slavery, then you also can't really debate adding Texas, because the debate over adding Texas is a debate over slavery. But once this gag order is lifted, there's a new president. His name is President Polk. He is from the Charlotte area. We'll talk about him later. But President Polk, he runs basically on a campaign where he says, if I become president, I'm going to add Texas. And in 1845, he adds Texas as the 28th state. Now he adds the entire green area, light green and dark green, which makes Mexico furious because the US, in their minds, has just added a piece of Mexico to their country. And this is going to provoke something called the Mexican-American War that we'll talk about a little bit down the road. All right, so that's the Texas Revolution, the Texas fight for independence. Remember, Texas is an independent country for several years before it is added to the United States as a state.